Good morning, everybody, and thank you for your patience just as we work through a few technical issues. My name is Deputy Mayor Stephen Holliday, and I'm the chair of the Audit Committee. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'm calling meeting 13 of the Audit Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. Today's meeting is being held with members of council and city staff participating both by video conference and in person at City Hall, in the council chamber. City Hall is open to the public, and anyone is welcome to attend the meeting in the council chamber at City Hall today. The public may continue to participate electronically by video conference. This meeting is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. We currently have one registered public speaker for this meeting. The clerk staff have connected remote public speakers to the meeting by video conference, and there are public speakers in the room with us today. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Audit Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking Speakers for today's meeting. I ask for everyone's patience if we experience any delays or technical problems during the meeting. The clerk has provided all agenda materials via the clerk's meeting portal. City Clerk's IT staff will be available to participate to help with your devices. As part of each agenda item, I will ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to question staff or to speak. I will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure that they turn on their video and to raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, this is a paperless meeting, and I want to remind you that you must submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at auditcommittee@toronto.ca to help with motions. If there are any visiting members of council attending the meeting today, I would encourage you to turn on your video so that I know that you are present and can give the opportunity to ask questions of staff or to speak. This will also assist the clerk staff to record attendance for the meeting. Although we are in different locations and meeting today remotely, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Don't see any. Next, we will need a motion to confirm the minutes from our last committee meeting.
I'll move the motion.
Councillor Nunziata moves. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Let's proceed with the agenda review. We have 13 items on the agenda. The first item is AU 13.1, the 2021 Audited Financial Statements, Consolidated City, Sinking Funds, and Consolidated Trust Funds. I'm going to hold that because we have a presentation from staff. AU 13.2, the City of Toronto Audit Findings Report for the year ended December 31st, 2021. As well, we have a presentation on that, so I'll hold that item. AU 13.3. Is the financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2021, agencies. May I ask someone to move that item?
I'll move it.
Councillor Nunziata moves AU 13.3. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. AU 13.4 is the status of financial statement audits of the city's agencies and corporations for the year ended December 31st, 2021. This is a receipt report. May I ask a member of the committee to move the staff recommendations?
I'll move it.
Councillor Nunziata moves the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 13.5, Toronto Police Service Audit of 911 Public Safety Answering Point Operations, Better Support for Staff, improved information management and outcomes. We have both a speaker and we have a presentation on this particular item. Catherine, I'll also note that I understand the presentation also refers to the following item, which is AU 13.6. And if the committee is willing to consent, we can consider both of those items at the same time because of the subject matter, and most certainly will allow time for questions, understanding there's two different reports before us. So the following item is AU 13.6, Review of Toronto Police Service, Opportunities to Support More Effective Responses to Calls for Service, A Journey of Change, Improving Community Safety and Well-Being Outcomes. And so that item will also be held for a presentation. AU 13.7 is the installation and maintenance of traffic signs contract, follow-up on complaints received. There are recommendations before us. Any members wishing to hold or to speak to this item? May I have a member move the Auditor General's recommendations?
I'll move it.
Councillor Nunziata moves the Auditor General's recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. AU 13.8 is Part 2 of the Audit of Emergency Shelters, Lessons Learned from Hotel Operations Update. There is a confidential attachment. Are there any members with questions or wishing to hold this item? Understood. Councillor Fillion holds that item, and I'll advise the committee if we do go into camera, I'm going to suggest that we'll move this to the last item. AU 13.9 is the status update of the IT Disaster Recovery Plan. Are there any members wishing to hold to ask questions of staff? If not, I'm going to hold the item in my name. Madam Clerk, if you could pre-circulate through the CNP, I have a brief motion for this, but we can certainly put that out there for members to have a look at it. I think it'll be a quick item when we get to it. AU 13.10, which is the Community Center's 2021 Audited Financial Statements. There is a recommendation before us from Madam Auditor General. Are there any members wishing to hold this item or speak to it? Seeing none, may I have a member of the committee move the recommendations? Councillor Nunziata moves the recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 13.11, Welch LLP Report on a Read and Board Financial Controls and Governance. Are there any questions on this item or members wishing to speak on the item? Seeing none, I'm going to hold this item in my name. Madam Clerk, I do have a motion prepared, and may I ask that you pre-circulate that to my colleagues through the CMP. And I'll advise that it's a rather straightforward motion, and we should be able to deal with this item efficiently when it comes up. AU 13.12, which is the ARENA's 2020 Audited Financial Statements, Report 3, and status of 2021 and prior audited financial statements. Are there any questions on this item or members wishing to speak on it? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, I'm just going to confirm if we were able to get a communication in on this item. We did. Very good. So may I have a member of the committee move the recommendations that are before us?
I'll move it.
Councillor Nunziata moves the Auditor General's recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And item number 12 is carried. And item AU 13.13, which is the Auditor General's 2022 Work Plan, Update and Request for Administrative Amendment to City Reserve Fund Accounts. Are there any members with questions on this item or wishing to speak to it? I'm going to hold this item. I understand a technical amendment is in the works, and we will deal with that matter in order as it comes up through the process of the meeting. Thank you for that. We will now go back to the top of the list, and we will go to item AU 13.1, which is the 2021 Audited Financial Statements, Consolidated City Sinking Funds, and Consolidated Trust Funds. And I will welcome members of the Toronto Public Service, Sandra Calafretti and Jerry Lee, to make a presentation to the committee. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction and good morning. Deputy Mayor Holliday and members of Audit Committee, we are here to present the City's 2021 Audited Consolidated Financial Statements, which incorporate the City's sinking fund balances. The statements are prepared in accordance with public sector accounting standards. KPMG will be issuing an unqualified opinion on the City's 2021 statements and are here today to present their audit findings.
I am pleased to provide you with a brief overview of our 2021 financial position. On an overall basis, we continue to be affected by the financial pressures and challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. But in contrast to last year, we also saw favorable trends of economic recovery on the balance sheet. First, we continue to maintain a high proportion of liquid assets so that we could remain agile when our pandemic-related efforts needed us to quickly address our cash needs. Second, our receivables showed signs of economic recovery. As we ended the year, we noted that our turnover ratios, which help us assess the efficiency and effectiveness of our collection efforts, were back to 70% of our pre-pandemic levels. This was an optimistic sign, especially in comparison to last year's performance. On this slide, we wanted to emphasize that we're investing in infrastructure to support service delivery and obtaining debt for these assets, so we monitor these balances very closely. When we take a look at our standalone tax-supported debt servicing costs as a proportion of our property tax revenues, we can note that we have a strong ratio of 15% and that we are continuing to comply with our self-imposed debt service limit. In addition, we use 6% of our consolidated revenues towards financing charges this year, which is a reasonable amount considering our municipality's size and complexity. On an overall basis, our robust debt policies have also allowed us to maintain strong credit ratings during the year.
The income statement reflects the City's financial performance, which captures annual revenues earned and expenses incurred based on management decisions and financial activities throughout the year. Pandemic efforts continue to be visible in the income statement. Program funding revenues were made whole through support from senior levels of government, such as the Save Restart funding of $1.7 billion, instrumental in executing and enhancing critical frontline services in response to the pandemic. For the past 2 years, between 30 and 35% of our program funding came from senior levels of government versus pre-pandemic years, when this external funding represented only 26% of our total revenues. COVID-specific program costs are the largest cost driver. These expenses include the cost of immunization clinics and temporary shelters that met public health distancing protocols. Our income statement reflects the reality of 2021. The City continued to prioritize our pandemic response while maintaining strong financial management practices and fiscal restraints where possible.
We wanted to bring your attention to upcoming changes to the accounting standards that focus on improvements to disclosures related to the value of our investments, how we may legally be obligated to retire some of our infrastructure assets, and when we're eligible to recognize revenue for our various revenue streams. For the most part, the impact of these standards are relatively minor, but we wanted to note that AROs are predicted to be more significant in nature because we have such a large number of TCAs. We're currently taking steps to scope which of our assets will be affected, as well as engaging our consolidated entities so that we're aware of and aligned on our accounting treatment decisions. We understand the importance of modernizing our operations for purposes of improving overall service delivery. As a result, the 2020 management letter issued by KPMG validated the various initiatives that have been underway over the past 2 years as part of the Financial System Transformation Project. Further details of our work plan in conjunction with KPMG's management letter will be provided in a separate presentation for you today.
There is a growing need to enhance the financial planning and financial reporting environments with sustainability reporting. We are especially proud to be the first Canadian government to publish an ESG report and the first to include a financial statement note reflecting greenhouse gas emissions reduction progress, and have future plans to have this note audited. We are also actively involved with CPA Canada in accounting consultations to ensure that future accounting and sustainability standards specifically consider the municipal perspective. Linking sustainability initiatives to measurement and financial performance will ensure that sustainability is embedded into our daily service delivery and decision-making. And similar to prior years, the 2021 statements are published in the annual financial report, which closes off the city's fiscal year, summarizes key financial and operational highlights, and complements other performance reports, such as the ESG report. So we do encourage you to read the 2021 document. And finally, I wanted to conclude this presentation by thanking divisions across the city for their support of the year-end process and audit. KPMG has been an incredible partner throughout year-end audit 2021, continuing to work with accounting services to enable a seamless and positive audit process. And I do wish to thank my entire team in accounting services for their hard work and diligence throughout 2021, especially through the year-end and audit process with the creation of the financial statements in the annual financial report. So we thank you for the opportunity to present today and are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff on this item? Are there any members of the committee wishing to speak? May I have a motion to
Do you want me to move the motion?
Yep, I'm just going to confirm the motion. It's a city council action. So, Councillor Nunziata, are you willing to move the staff recommendations? All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. We will go to AU 13.2, which is the City of Toronto audit findings for the report for the year ended December 31st, 2021. And for that item, we have a presentation. We'll just give it a moment for folks to change over. I'll also say thank you to Ms. Calafretti and Ms. Lee regarding the presentation to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, let's see how this works. Sorry, everybody. What do I do?
I think you have to plug the cable in.
Sorry, first time doing this.
This
Oh,
one goes in there. Get this guy.
oh. Well, we'll see. Maybe.
There you go.
Okay, that big enough?
Yep.
Oops.
And the arrows can be used to things.
Okay. That good?
Looks good.
Okay.
We
You
can
just-
see. All right. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I'll welcome to the podium Kevin Travers, Lead Audit Engagement Partner from KPMG, and Maria Kushnud, Project Management Partner from KPMG. Welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you and good morning. Maria and I are going to speak this morning to the audit findings report. We're going to make some brief comments. We don't intend to do a page by page. And then certainly we're happy to respond to questions you may have at the conclusion of our remarks. I'll start off by making a few comments with respect to the audit highlights itself. And those are to say that the audit work from our standpoint has been completed. We are in a position to issue our unqualified or clean audit opinion for the consolidated financial statements for the City of Toronto for the year ended December 31st, 2021. The only items which are outstanding as of this morning are the items which you would expect to be outstanding, and that is namely completing our conversations with this group this morning, understanding ultimately that the city approves the financial statements through council, and at that point in time, management will provide to us their signed representation letter, and will at that point issue our signed opinion. We were able to conduct the audit in accordance with the plan that was presented to the Audit Committee some months prior with no deviations. There were no uncorrected audit differences as a result of the performance of our audit. There were 2 corrected items which are included in the representation letter. We did, during the course of our audit, issue a management letter which relates to performance improvement opportunities for the city to consider. We did not encounter any significant control deficiencies, rather just these performance improvement observations which are included in our management letter. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Maria to provide some context as to the areas that we performed the bulk of our audit work.
Thanks, Kevin. So I can take you through some of the more specific items related to the audit of the City of Toronto. I've grouped those items into ones that include estimation uncertainty and the ones that don't. There are 2 items noted: employee benefits liabilities and contingent liabilities, including property and liability claims that include a significant amount of estimation uncertainty. For both of these items, City engaged their own actuarial specialists to assist them with estimating these liabilities. As part of our KPMG audit team, we engaged our own KPMG specialists that are well-versed in the actuarial estimation process. As a result of these audit procedures, we did not note any significant matters that should be brought forward to this committee today. The second item I wanted to highlight is related to tangible capital assets, which is the significant or the biggest non-financial asset for the city. On this slide, on page 11, we've laid out some detailed audit procedures related to tangible capital assets. There was one issue identified related to the misclassification of completed assets as assets under construction. This issue was communicated to management and it was corrected by management. So the financial statements that are presented in front of this committee today reflect the correct figures related to tangible capital assets. With that, I'll pass it to Kevin.
Thanks, Maria. We'll just make just a few comments in terms of what's included in our appendices. Again, we'll take the material largely as being read. Just to indicate the contents, there's quite a few items in there that are certainly worth perusing when you have the opportunity to do so. Included in there are commentaries with respect to current developments, not only of audit standard changes coming, but also with respect to accounting standard changes that are upcoming. Ms. Calafretti and Ms. Lee already referenced the asset retirement obligation standard change. It is a significant one. It will be required for the city to implement as part of their fiscal 2023 reporting, but certainly as a project, the city is certainly, it's very appropriate to get moving on that as soon as possible, as the city has done so. We have provided some information with respect to the scope of that change, and that really would reflect the conclusion of the formal part of our comments this morning. But Maria and I would be very happy to respond to any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Are there questions of the committee on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to allow myself a couple of questions. Thank you for bringing them before us. I do note that there is a management letter in there. And so if I got it correct, that the management letter pertains to an earlier audit. Would you be expecting a management letter for this audit, and when would the committee see that information?
Yes, thank you for the question. So there is a 2021 management letter. We provided that to management in draft for them to consider to ensure that our findings and suggestions are in fact correct. I would leave it to management as to in terms of when it would come forward to this committee.
Okay, thank you. That's it. That's all my questions. I'm going to speak on this item. Thank you very much. I do have 3 motions for my colleagues to consider on this item. Pardon me. Please excuse me. The clerk has reminded me that there's an additional presentation. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Travers and Ms. Kushnud. I will welcome to the front Andrew Flynn from the city. Andrew Flynn is the controller. Andrew, I apologize. You had the presentation ready and I almost skipped over it, so welcome to the front.
That's okay, Mr. Chair. Happy to be here. And I think our presentation is actually going to be relevant to your question that you just asked KPMG and your motions. So we're going to present a brief presentation on the KPMG audit recommendations, the management letter point. Stuart, if you could advance. Just by way of a bit of background, an unmodified or unqualified opinion was issued by KPMG on last year's financial statements, so for the year ended December 31st, 2020. As part of that, or as a byproduct of that engagement, KPMG did issue a management letter to the Chief Financial Officer, which has been included as an additional item on this year's agenda. As Kevin mentioned with respect to 2021, the same circumstance existed in 2020, such that they did not identify any significant deficiencies in the internal control framework, such that it affected their audit opinion. They did, however, identify 55 recommendations for process improvements for management to consider. As a result of that, management has created and is in the process of implementing those action plans, and I'm going to briefly walk through the status of those in this presentation. It is anticipated that an unqualified opinion will also be issued for 2021, and management has identified a number of additional preliminary recommendations, which are also included in this presentation. Stuart, if you could move forward. So just a bit of background with respect to the 2020 recommendations. The slide kind of talks about the general themes associated with those 55 recommendations. 31 of them are related to improved financial policies and procedures. 16 of them outline the need for clear roles and responsibilities when recording transactions. 5 of them discuss the need to centralize transaction processing and streamlining manual processes, and the remaining 3 deal with enhancing the financial acumen of staff across the city. It's important to note that over 50% of the actual plans have a direct linkage to the financial systems transformation project, which has been underway for a year and a half now. Go ahead, Stuart. On this slide, we talk very high level, a quick snapshot of the overall action plans. And you can see by this slide that a number of them are underway and continue to be worked on throughout the current year. There are, of course, because of the size and scope of the types of impacts that we're talking about here, there is likely to be intermediate and long-term plans that are required. The financial systems transformation project itself will go well into 2024. Move forward, Stuart. This is an internal risk assessment of the 2020 recommendations, just from a point of view of risk. What we're talking about here is the probability of occurrence and significant impact. And we've determined that 22 of the recommendations are of a high risk, 30 of them are more of a medium risk, and 3 are of low risk. In the next couple of slides, I'm just going to briefly touch base on the status of the high risk recommendations. The largest portion of the recommendations had to do with our bank accounts and petty cash management. We've been working with KPMG on digging more deeply into their recommendations and have completed a more in-depth review This deals with things like who can open bank accounts, when are they reconciled, and we're moving forward with improving cash management process improvements as part of financial systems transformation. The next set deal with it says procurement practices. These are more probably appropriately described as the payment half of the procurement process. We've done a deeper dive into the root causes of the inconsistent processes that the city undertakes, and we'll be bringing forward also streamlined procurement to payment processes in the future. A couple of comments around city's books and records. Again, this is being addressed through the target business operating model as part of the financial systems transformation project. The next three items deal with technology services observations, all of which are either well in hand or in the process of being remediated through changes that technology services has already put in place. The next slide, please, Stuart. The top two slides or the top two items deal with our property and liability claims files. It notes that the recommendation will be addressed by a new cloud-based solution that is going to be implemented in the current year. The last two comments on this slide also deal with more reporting matters. Again, I would highlight the fact that FSTP will address both of these comments. Stuart, if you could move forward. As mentioned before, KPMG is going to bring forward a management letter for 2021's audits. We've included on this slide just effectively the headings associated with those. There are further 5 recommendations. Management is in the process of reviewing the recommendations and reaching out to the affected divisions to ensure that the observations are in fact completely accurate, and we are in the process of developing action plans. And finally, our last slide is next steps. We'll continue to meet with KPMG to clarify those 2021 observations and bring forward and implement an action plan. We will continue to monitor all of the recommendations, including the last 5, with the expectations that progress updates will be brought forward. If there's any delays or concerns in implementing action plans, those will be escalated. And when those action plans are fully implemented, we intend to have internal audit, Stuart Campbell sitting beside me, validate that the action plans have in fact addressed the outstanding comments. That's the end of my presentation, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Just so I understand and to recap, you are envisioning a process now to manage the recommendations that have come out of the management letters and the findings of the city's external auditor.
Yes.
And so this is a process which is different but parallel and important to the findings that our Auditor General brings us through this particular committee. And it's just that it's a second and a separate process.
So that is true, Mr. Chair. The management letter points are a byproduct of KPMG's external audit, so it is not part of their formal requirements. But as they observe, make observations through their audit, they do bring those forward for management to consider with respect to improving processes or improving our systems. And that is something we've built and intend to carry forward as we amend our systems.
Okay, and the recommendations, I think there are 55 of them, and you've indicated that there will be 5 more as we go through the cycles. Would it be fair to say that some overlap with other previous findings of the Auditor General, and some are entirely unique and very specific? Many are.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I would anticipate that there is always going to be overlap from a point of view of the KPMG's recommendations, generally speaking, are based upon their annual audit, and of course those will have broad reaching across the city implications. The Auditor General's work plan, generally speaking, has very targeted targeted responsibilities and projects. So there will be, I expect, overlap in some cases.
Okay, and are you going to deliver all those 55 recommendations, or do they belong to various people in the city?
So I will be responsible for ensuring the coordination of all of the recommendations. That's the controller's function. However, the actual implementation or the action plan will be dependent upon the particular matter and be dealt with by that appropriate division, or multiple divisions in some cases.
Just like the Auditor General's findings. Sometimes they are financial in nature and they could be yours, and maybe some of these 55 are yours, but leaders all across the organization would be responsible for implementing them depending on the nature of the items.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
And so your tracking process really is about tracking the delivery of the work that many of your colleagues will have to do in order to satisfy these recommendations.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. You know, again, I would hearken back to the comment about well over half of them have to do with the financial systems, or will be addressed by the financial systems transformation project, which is a finance and treasury-led initiative that is broad across the city and will impact all of the processes that the business processes that the city undertakes. So it will have an impact on virtually all employees.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I just check. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata?
Yeah, I just have a question on number 39, the petty cash. You commented a bit on that. It was reported that the account balance for petty cash was 150, which is quite high for petty cash.
Through the chair to you, Councillor, I concur. That is a large balance. I do know in that particular instance, that is more of a control account. So SDF&A has a large balance, and they use it to support all of the divisions of community and social services. But that is absolutely a valid observation and will be something that needs to be addressed.
Right, it is quite high. Then number 40, the trust bank reconciliation. So it says here that lack of appropriate training, knowledge, and skill set of individuals completing accounting and financial reporting. So would we have to train the staff? So is this saying that the staff are not trained properly for bank reconciliation?
So in this particular case, that observation that KPMG made forward was that when the questioning that KPMG does from a point of view of reviewing any of these processes, it can become clear if the staff person knows the specific tasks or specific tasks that they're required to do, and they generally speaking follow a path. But it can become fairly clear that their level of knowledge lacks depth. And in that case, this would be an example in this particular case. The person is competent to be able to do the bank reconciliation themselves, but in KPMG's opinion, they need more training.
But was there not any oversight?
I would expect that the management in that particular case would have reviewed the bank reconciliations to ensure that they were done properly, but it's a little more challenging from that perspective to ensure that the individual has sufficient knowledge to be able to anticipate any unexpected circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? All right, any members wishing to speak? I have some motions, but if anyone would like to go ahead. Seeing none. Madam Clerk, if you could present the three motions, and I'll just talk my colleagues through them. All right, so there's three parts. The first is we're going to recommend to City Council that they ask the Auditor General to ask KPMG or our external auditor to report promptly on items of concern, such as the ones that are raised in the management letter. We note there's a lot of items on this one, and it has taken a fair amount of time to get before council. I think that there is appetite at this committee and council regarding these, so that's a request. The second is to ask the city manager to go ahead and implement all 55 of these recommendations. And I think it's important that city council ask that that be done. And we'll explain why in a moment. And the third is to create a reporting cycle. Because if we ask about this management letter and we send it through council, it ends up buried in a bunch of paper, and we don't necessarily know if they've been executed. It might be detected in the next cycle of KPMG. We don't know. But we know that the next cycle of KPMG's reporting is going to bring us 5 more recommendations. So just like we have a system at the Audit Committee to track recommendations and to track the status of them, I'm suggesting that, and we heard about it today, that there is going to be one, and that will also be facilitated by the Internal Audit Division. And one of the ways that this can be brought forward is through the variance report to City Council, and I'm suggesting that it be brought back twice a year at least. And I think the biggest message that the committee can send, especially with item number 2, is what I got to in my questions of Mr. Flynn. You know, leaders across the organization can't leave this within just the hands of the financial sub-part of the organization, because this has to do with audit. As we know from all the work in this committee, so many of these pieces have to do with just how we run our organization. And I think it's really important every leader in the city have a look at this management letter, just like every leader should be looking at all of the audits that come through here to figure out what lessons they can learn and apply to their part of the organization. And of course, it's not the controller or the CFO that's going to deliver on this. It is going to be the leaders across the city that are going to implement these recommendations. So I think council needs to have line of sight on the status of these as they go through, and the expectation, of course, that they will be executed upon. So with that, if there's no questions on my particular motion, I'll ask for your support. I'll call the vote on the amendments to the item. All those in favor? Any opposed? And then on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. Thank you. So the next item on the list, I think, Catherine, is number 5. So that is AU 13.5, Toronto Police Service, Audit of 911, Public Safety Answering Point Operations, Better Support for Staff, Improved Information Management and Outcomes. And committee members, I'll remind you that we're going to consider it at the same time as AU 13.6, which is Review of Toronto Police Service, Opportunities to Support More Effective Responses, and Calls for Service, A Journey of Change, Improving Community Safety and Well-Being Outcome. I will materials for the committee, and I'll remind the committee that we do have a speaker following the presentation. So we'll just give folks a moment to get set up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. I'd like to welcome Tara Anderson, Assistant Auditor General, and I'd like to thank the team of CLL Young, Bruno Galli, Irene Hugh, Aditi Batish, Faison Hanouf, and I think that's everybody. I'll go over at the end. So As you know, we've undertaken 2 reports, 2 audits at Toronto Police. And I think it's important from the top to talk about why this work is important. And then we will speak to, we'll speak to why this work is important. We'll speak then about how we conducted our work. And finally, it's important to focus on what we found, key themes, and the roadmap moving forward. In relation to why this work matters, if you are interested in reducing calls to 911 because there are long wait times, this report matters. If you are interested in finding alternative responses that would be, in many cases, a more appropriate response and help to relieve some of the work from Toronto Police so that they can respond faster to certain calls, this presentation is important. And if you wish to have an opportunity to influence faster response times, this presentation is important. So the focus is reduce calls to 911 where they are not appropriate. If they come into 911, that the right response is chosen. And then if a police need to respond, that they're there in a fast time frame.
So in terms of how we conducted our work, first of all, our Auditor General's office is independent and provides an objective lens when doing this work. We must be invited in by the board in order to audit Toronto Police Service. Otherwise, we do not have the legislative authority to do so. And it has been over 10 years since we were last invited in. But this board has invited us in to conduct a risk assessment and develop a risk-based audit plan. And these 2 projects and our previous cybersecurity assessment are the first projects on that audit plan. We started this audit and review over a year ago, and both involved extensive work and an evidence-based approach. There were initially some challenges and barriers in receiving the requested data due in part to the legislation, but our MOU with the board and TPS, support from the chief, and our weekly meetings with TPS staff helped in overcoming these challenges, and we were provided with access to information and data we required for our audit and review. Having said that, not all the data we were seeking was available to TPS, and that did result in a scope limitation for our 911 audit and an extensive amount of work in using the reports and manual spreadsheets that were available for our data analysis. We use statistically valid and randomly selected samples, and we also consulted with experts, including a panel of law enforcement officers and an academic with 911 expertise. We also consulted with stakeholders across TPS, including the officers, and met with the Toronto Police Association, and we met with city management, including those who are leading Toronto's Community Crisis Service pilots, that's the mental health pilots, and reviewed their community consultation that was done. So we have provided 3 reports to the board and here to City Audit Committee that they have provided. The first one is our audit of TPS's 911 operations. The second is our review of opportunities to support more effective responses to calls for service. And our third provides an overall summary of the key common themes of those 2 reports. We will be showing our videos today for the 2 main reports, and I'll provide a quick summary of the key next steps after each, and then our Auditor General will walk you through our key common themes report and overall next steps needed in moving forward together. Okay, if we can play the video for the 911 audit.
Emergency, require police, fire, or ambulance.
When you dial 911, it goes to a call center. The Toronto Police Service runs the call center for all emergency response in the city of Toronto. This call center transfers calls to fire, police, ambulance, or alternative responders and takes the police calls. It also responds to the police non-emergency line and dispatches police when needed for calls to both lines. The call center receives over 1.8 million calls a year. About 1.1 million of these are to 911, and over 700,000 are to the police non-emergency line. It's vital that 911 calls are answered quickly. The call center aims to meet the industry standard and answer every 911 call within 15 seconds, 90% of the time. The call center did not meet this goal from 2018 to 2021. Other jurisdictions are also challenged in meeting the time frame required by this standard. To understand why, we dug into the data. We found that when you call 911 impacts how long you wait for the call to be answered. The peak times are usually between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., which is when the call answering times are generally longer. On average, call answering times during peak periods were trending at about twice the standard. The average wait time varied significantly throughout the day. As you can see in this graph from 2018, the darker the bars, the longer the wait time. On some days at peak times, the wait time was 8 minutes or longer. Call volume and staffing levels have the biggest impact on the call answering time. The call center operates on a demand-based model. That means the call volume is determined by the public who call 911. Every call gets answered, and callers who hang up before they get an answer are called back. Staffing levels are the main lever to keep the call answering time down. While it's extremely important to have good data and information to plan staffing levels, the call center doesn't have the data and modern information systems it needs to effectively plan its staffing levels and monitor its performance to better identify which calls could be suitable for alternative community-based responses. TPS is implementing a new system for next generation 911 that will allow callers to contact 911 by text and video, in addition to traditional phone calls. This won't automatically fix the issues. TPS needs to ensure the data it needs is identified and included in its data strategy and information systems. Operators have a difficult and stressful job. There was a high rate of daily absences for sick time combined with an increasing number of staff injured on duty, resulting in fewer available staff. This can lead to increased overtime hours for some and can impact their well-being. TPS needs strategies to address staffing issues and to improve the operator's health and well-being. TPS may also need more staff to be able to meet its service standards, particularly during peak periods. While the 911 number is for emergencies, we found that non-emergency calls made up almost 60% of the total calls to 911. About 1/3 of the non-emergency calls were abandoned calls and pocket dials, and operators must call them back. To reduce non-emergency calls, TPS and the city need a public education campaign about calling 911 when it's an emergency and non-police or non-emergency numbers to contact. Our report also found a need for improved clarity of the operational manual, technological supports, and additional training to better support operators for the call center. A need for all police officers to indicate their availability for the next call to help reduce dispatch wait times, and the importance of funding 911 operations, including NG 911. The Auditor General has made 26 recommendations in 5 key areas to further improve the 911 operations and its ability to help keep Toronto safe. TPS has committed to implementing all 26 of them.
Great, so to recap, the 2 main factors impacting call wait time are call volume and staffing. In terms of assessing the appropriate event type and priority rating for the event, we did find that 85% were done correctly, but of course there can still be further improvement and support provided for the operators. So the 4 key next steps needed related to our 911 audit are, first of all, regular public education and targeted awareness campaigns, which will help to reduce the 911 call volume for calls that are not emergencies or not police matters. Number 2, to modernize TPS's information systems and use the data to inform workforce management, operations, and decision-making. Third, to determine minimum staffing requirements using the data and ensure sufficient available staff are in place, particularly during the peak periods, and this will help to improve call answer times and reduce wait times. And then last but not least is to better support the communications operators. It's not an easy job that they have, and 3 of the areas we've identified include improved clarity in the operations manual, technology to assist them, and additional training. And we're now going to show you our video on our review of opportunities to support more effective responses to calls for service. Okay, if you can please play the video.
This review examined whether the Toronto Police Service is using resources efficiently and effectively to achieve its mandate under the Police Services Act and providing the most value-added services and outcomes for the people of Toronto. Of the total dispatched police calls in 2019, lower priority non-emergency calls represented almost half. The blue pieces sometimes need a response, but not all need to be from a priority response unit police officer. TPS has some alternative police responses in place for some of these lower priority calls, which helps free up time of the priority response unit officers. We reviewed a sample of lower priority non-emergency calls from 6 event types. We wanted to see if a priority response unit police officer was needed to respond, or whether another group could address some of these calls. Our results gave us a window into what was happening so that we could make recommendations for change. On average, in 2019, it took officers about 19 minutes to respond to Priority 1 calls and 50 minutes for Priority 2 calls. TPS's target is 6 minutes. While most calls we looked at still required a police response, a substantial number did not. Many of these calls involved people experiencing homelessness or mental health challenges, or were disputes with family, neighbors, or between landlords and tenants. The root cause of these issues was not intended to and can't be resolved by an emergency police response. In some cases, a non-police alternative may be more effective. Also, when a frontline officer is tied up on a lower priority non-emergency call, it means they're not available for a higher priority call that comes in at that time. This highlights the importance of having alternative responses available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The city and police are piloting alternative non-police responses for mental health-related calls and should, in partnership with the community, consider additional alternative responses that could provide better outcomes. This could include community dispute mediation and its Streets to Homes outreach to connect people experiencing homelessness with housing and other supports needed. To move forward together, it will take a whole-of-government approach and investment to set up the social services infrastructure. Change needs to be built from evidence-based data. There's a need to invest in TPS systems to capture information that can be analyzed to help inform future alternative responses. TPS, the city, and community partners must make the bold decision to work together on developing these alternative responses to have long-lasting and better outcomes for all. It's important to recognize that this is not a quick fix, but a journey of change that needs clear leadership, significant investment, commitment, and collaboration. The report also identified that public education can help reduce 911 calls and calls to the non-emergency line where police aren't needed, and opportunities for increased use of technology will help TPS to become more efficient. The Auditor General has made 25 recommendations. TPS and the city have committed to working with each other and other partners to implement the recommendations.
So to recap, PRU police officers have effectively become the default response to many lower priority calls, due in part to there not being an effective alternative non-police response available when needed. Many of these calls involved mental health and homelessness, where an emergency police response is not intended to and cannot resolve the root cause, and if an effective alternative response was available 24/7, it could help provide better outcomes for people. Also, response times for emergency calls, priority 1 to 3, need improvement. So in summary, the three key next steps needed related to this review are, number 1, to explore alternative police and non-police strategies and responses together with the city and using evidence-based data. Number 2, to improve police response times for emergency calls for service, so that's the priority 1 to 3. And third, to increase leverage of technology and automation to improve TPS's efficiency, so for example, accelerating the digital officer program. Now I'm going to turn it over to our Auditor General, who will speak to our key common themes report and the overall key next steps that will be needed to address our recommendations.
Thank you, Assistant Auditor General. So we included as a supplemental report to each of those 2 prior reports key common themes, and I'll summarize it on one slide. There are 5 common themes that run across these 2 reports. The first is information and data. It is lacking, and information and data is key to trends. It's key to identifying opportunities for alternative responses. It's key to trust and transparency, and it's key to accountability as the teams move forward and start reporting out. Really, really important to have that, especially on the TPS side, and their systems are lacking as we identified in our report. It's not a question of willingness, it's a question of systems. 2, 3, and 5 are the areas for the city to focus. Number 2 is building alternative responses. I'll go into that a little bit more. The third is building greater community education and awareness. This is a joint project with TPS that needs to be undertaken, kind of joined at the hip, to reduce 911 calls and get them to the right response area. And number 5 will be to recognize as a journey of change. In relation to number 4, I'm just including 1 and 4 because it's important to understand, for the partners to understand each other's questions, concerns, and what they're struggling with, and TPS is struggling with response times. But in relation to number 5, there's a huge opportunity to move forward, but we have to recognize there's no quick fix here. It's a journey of change. So let's go through those very quickly. I'm only going to go through 2, 3, and 5. In relation to common theme number 2, there are huge opportunities to embrace growing alternative responses. The city has been successful in some of their pilots. It's very exciting what they're doing, but our report outlines a number of new initiatives that can be undertaken or the prior pilots that can be expanded, such as mediation. And you can see how everything intertwines. And if you remember this picture, an alternative response can reduce a call to 911 because it might go to 211. It might be a better outcome, and there'll be more appropriate community supports, such as a homeless person who may be panhandling. There might be an opportunity for somebody to engage, like Gord's group to Streets to Homes, for example, to support them. In relation to TPS communications, fewer calls helps them to be able to manage their calls. And also in relation to police, having a proper place to put the call is important. What I found when we were conducting our work is not a question of if the call was going to move over, it was a question of where it was going to be put. I found myself listening to a call that involved a homeless person, and Streets to Homes wasn't operating at that time of night, or there was another, there wasn't the group to go. And so focusing on building the alternative responses in partnership with TPS so that it's a coordinated transfer of calls is going to be very key going forward. In relation to building a community education and awareness, while it's important for emergency calls, medical, crime, to come to 911, there are other calls that are not an emergency or they're not even a police matter. For example, there could be transferring calls related to, for example, a homeless matter might not be a police matter, or animal control, or I've actually heard Guelph police identify that they're wondering why Rogers was out as an item. They had to ask the public to stop calling 911 because of the hiccup in the communications. And so, it's important that there's an education program to identify when it's important to call 911, but also when you can call 211 and when you can call 311. And finally, it's important to notice that this is a journey of change. When we started to undertaking this project, what we saw was opportunities, but it's not a straight path. We were trial and error, and when we started to peel the why police were going and asking and challenging, we came to the conclusion that they were being called. There was nobody left to go. They were the person they thought in that immediate moment was the fastest person to go, when in fact a better solution, if it was available, would be selected. And so there's an opportunity to move forward, but it's actually going to be a journey of change. There's funding that's going to have to be spoken about. There's time to evaluate it's going to be important to evaluate the alternative responses and track how it prevents a subsequent call to 911, or how it prevents the first call to 911, and what that community impact is, positive or negative, so that you can identify the best alternative. It's only been twice in my career that I've recommended the city's request support from the federal and the provincial government, and that's been in the case management and the shelters, and it's in this project. And the reason is, many of the struggles that the city has, and a lot of the time of why the police is called, goes back to homelessness and mental health supports that are deficient. And so it's a time to come together as a city, to move forward together, and to renew the city's call for support in mental health and shelter. And it's also going to require collaboration between the city, TPS, and other agencies. This is an opportunity for the entire city to come together. To move forward, it's going to take a whole of city approach, a community approach, a plan, a strategic plan, to start moving from a patchwork of alternative services into a framework of alternative services, and to coordinate that with TPS. That provides, as calls are moved to the right area, it provides the opportunity for the city to move forward and to really build that social infrastructure in the way that I believe it should be. It's not a lift and shift, just for clarity. It took us a lot of time, because of the way the systems are set up, to start to untangle which calls can go. The digging into the information and identifying categories of calls that can be available for for an alternative response is going to be important going forward. So overall, the city, TPS, community agencies, and stakeholders need to move forward together, in our view. It's important to plan what the shared outcomes are, and they were on my first slide. Reducing calls to 911 when it's not a 911 call. Establishing and evaluating further alternatives, and really to build out that framework of a social infrastructure, and then explore alternative strategies for gradual transition of calls. And especially, I would start the two main areas, which are homelessness and community dispute mediation. And also the mental health pilots that are ongoing at the city, I would expand those. Again, it's a whole of government and a whole of community approach with sufficient investment from the provincial and federal government, particularly related to mental health and homelessness. Now, we understand that this is a longer-term strategy in relation to item 2, but if you can build the framework in item 1, and you can build the pilots, and you can show and demonstrate the outcomes, in my view, you're set up for success to move forward and request those funds from the federal and provincial government, because it's a structure that I believe over time will save money. And I'm going to provide, actually my Assistant Auditor General is going to provide very quickly some first steps on the roadmap, just to start addressing the opportunities here.
Thank you, Auditor General. So what we've done is provided a suggested roadmap related to the recommendations that are relevant for the city, and those are in your cover reports. And so we've split them out by short-term, intermediate, and longer term. And because the city has started a number of pilots that would be alternative non-police responses, or could be, those are things that the city can start doing in the short term. So first of all, the mental health pilots, the Toronto Community Crisis Service pilots. It's really critical to ensure those 4 pilots and the use of 211 are operating effectively. And 2, as our Auditor General mentioned, to advocate for additional funding from the other levels of government for future rollout of additional mental health response and resources. And then, as already as planned in the intermediate, to evaluate those pilots together with TPS, including TPS's Gerstein call center pilot, and to work together with TPS and their board on the data that's needed to inform future rollouts and coordinated on them. So for example, there's certain event types that it's obvious that it's mental health, there's others where it's not such, and so long-term, then, depending on the funding, to then increase those resources for mental health supports. Secondly, is the public education and targeted awareness campaign. So our Auditor General has spoke to that already and how that can reduce the number of non-emergency calls coming through 911. And a third of those are actually related to abandoned calls and pocket dials. So there's a little example here on the slide of some communication that can be used to educate people to not, if they do accidentally call 911, to not just hang up, to actually stay on the line so you tell the operator that it happened so they don't need to call back. We're also suggesting that a 3-digit number is considered for the police non-emergency line and to address public perception and stigmas related to mental health and homelessness. And then to increase awareness of non-emergency numbers and resources. So for example, 211 and 311. And we're suggesting that once you have the alternative non-police responses in place, to then rebrand 211 to be a community distress line for those alternative responses. Third is the area of homelessness and unwanted guests. So the city already has a city streets to homes outreach program, although there is limited staffing in that area. And so that is still something that the city could consider expanding and perhaps pilot targeted repeat locations. So we found a number of fast food restaurants in the downtown core were areas where a business owner may call 911 and ask for a person experiencing homelessness to be removed. But then that person experiencing homelessness doesn't receive the supports that they need, and there could be repeated calls after call after call. And then in the long term, to increase the capacity of the city's shelter, housing supports, and safe beds program to further support those experiencing homelessness. Fourth are the other alternative non-police responses. So the city did have a pilot prior to COVID on community dispute mediation through its municipal licensing standards area. So we are recommending that you look at restarting those pilots and to evaluate them and potentially roll out further in the future. The city also has through TCHC special constables for the TCHC buildings. So you could consider further leveraging those special constables for disputes, check for well-being, and the repeat calls for service, as there were quite a few repeat calls there. And then as you get more towards the intermediate, a number of our samples were noisy small gatherings, so not noisy parties with violence and weapons, but there might be a birthday party where the police were called through 911 to go and attend, but they couldn't attend for quite some time. So there may be some opportunities there where MLS could respond to some of those calls for service, informed by a cost effectiveness assessment and also improved data sharing between MLS and TPS. And then in the longer term, so we looked at 6 event types, but as TPS continues to refine their data, there could be other areas where alternative non-police responses may be beneficial. So using that data and data from 211 and 311, the city can work together with TPS and its board to identify additional event types in the criteria. The next one is in terms of ambulance, fire, and police. So in the short term, there's something called C ambulance calls. So that's when police assist Toronto paramedic services. And there's many of those calls are for good reason, where the safety of the paramedics are at risk or where there's traffic control needed on the highway. So, but there are a number where we saw in our sample that police really weren't needed. And so the protocols and policies are in place, but it's a matter of following them, particularly related to the presence of alcohol, and making sure that the rationale for why police are needed is documented, that it's clear before they go out. And then in the intermediate, making sure there's an interconnected communication system between the 3 emergency responders, and that would also help so that if police are called out and they're not needed, that they know before they actually arrive on scene. And the last area is 311 Toronto referrals. So for this, we note that successful call diversion will depend on public awareness and effective and timely alternative responses being in place. So that's why we've had this more as the intermediate to long term. But in the intermediate, you can still document and analyze the reasons why callers are transferred between 911 and 311, and then use that data and analysis to then jointly assess the effectiveness of the call diversion strategies and make sure the responsibilities are fully understood by staff.
Okay, so we're just summarizing the last couple of slides. Really, to move forward together, it's important that TPS and the city identify the key shared outcomes, and that starts with strategic planning. It's important to be transparent and accountable by tracking what the outcome is intended to be and reporting against those, and really reporting against the progress of the agreed plans. And finally, it's important to be committed and to build trust and support between stakeholders. And that's important to move beyond barriers. What we found was a lot of misunderstanding in relation to police going to calls. Police are going because they're called, and there is a lack of a coordinated framework of alternative opportunities at the city to put those calls. And we did not find bias on the part of the operators in relation to not providing a call to the city. I found myself on the end of a call, reviewing a call, trying to figure out where I would put that call. And I really didn't have a spot. So if you focus on the alternative responses and you communicate and you work towards the shared outcomes, this can be an amazing opportunity to move forward as a city and really prepare, I guess what a Made in Toronto solution would be the best way I could describe it. So finally, it is a journey of change. It's a journey of having a roadmap. It's not necessarily going to be a straight line. It's helping one another. It's being clear and transparent on where the city and TPS is going, gathering the information so that you can continue to grow this program and investing in those systems. And then once you have your pilot structure, then preparing a plan to request any funding that would be needed or shifted to support the new plan. So that concludes our presentation, and we're open for questions. I think there is a deputant right now. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Very comprehensive and helpful presentation. But you are correct. We do have a guest speaker. And so we'll give it just a moment to change over the technology here, and then we'll have questions of staff. Our speaker is online, and I know the clerk staff are just making those arrangements.
You hear me? This is the host.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, sorry. And good morning, Deputy Mayor Holiday and rest of the council members.
Good morning,
I
Ms.
provided the
Atwell.
council. Thank you. I provided the council members full documentation of a woman that was being beaten for over an hour on a weekday between 3 and 5 p.m. last year, August 2021. The lack of police response to the calls, multiple calls for 911 for this situation, was quite appalling. I addressed this last month at the Toronto Police Services Board meeting, and Peter Cole pointed at the Peel Police, who were only called due to the lack of response by TPS, and a car accident that happened at a bus shelter. Neither of these two statements by Mr. Cole ring correct for me. The issue was in the TPS jurisdiction, 22 Division, not Peel, and one car accident should not handcuff 5 police officers. I had these questions originally, and I still have these questions. Why were 5 police divisions all too tied up to respond to a priority 1 call? That means, give or take, almost 1 million Torontonians could not get police assistance today, Tuesday, August 17th, 2021, from 5 police divisions, Division 11, Division 12, Division 22, Division 23, and Division 31, on a Tuesday afternoon between 3 and 5. I'm painfully aware of that being the situation. However, I doubt the people of Toronto know that was the case that day. But I do and cannot be able to get my questions answered. What would it take to have a car peeled away for a priority 1 call? As you can see from the documentation that the police sent me, and I've sent to you, we were the only other priority 1 request other than the car accident in all of the 5 divisions. What are the people of Toronto supposed to do when they require immediate police assistance for a priority 1 call and no one comes to the call for over an hour? Where does that leave the public in terms of safety? Where does that leave the victim who's being beaten? And furthermore, where does that leave your officers? It appears the officers are also not safe, as the documentation I received back states that a one-man cruiser has to volunteer to attend a priority 1 call if there is not a second cruiser available as a backup. What a horrible position for your officers to be in as well. It appears we are sadly understaffed, and this really needs to be addressed immediately. And the fact that no one is willing to answer these 3 questions from TPS looks less than transparent to me, as well as they're unwilling to take ownership of the issue. I sat and listened to Ms. Beverly Romeo Baylor's audit report last month at the TPS meeting. Same as this meeting. It is a brilliant report, and it speaks to this issue at length. However, with her recommendations, before they can be enacted, it's incumbent on the city councilors to address the issue and try and take as much corrective action as possible to get this somehow under control. An hour and a half for a priority 1, when that's the only priority 1 in 5 divisions other than a car accident, is just a horrific situation. And if you were on the other end of that, what would you have done with it? Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate very much letting me talk here.
Thank you, Ms. Atwell. You summed up your presentation at the end very, very well and helpfully to us. And as you know, materials were presented to the Toronto Police Services Board, and then we've got certain recommendations before us, but you did mention to City Council, should have attention on this. Do you have any specific recommendations to City Council about how things could be improved?
Well, if you look at that report, you'll see that somehow their communications, which the officer who wrote this report decided to call it a minor communications issue. I think not. If 5 divisions do not have a priority 1 call, yet no one is dispatching from any of those 5 divisions, there's something so sorely lacking in how they're dispersing their police officers. And I used to be a very huge supporter of the police. I've had relatives and friends still in all divisions. I just can't understand how an issue like that would happen. And the police, I've been chasing this since last August, sir. I've done the OIRTD, I've done the TPS, I've done it all, and I still can't get those 3 answered. Now, I understand that the Auditor General's report, like really, I couldn't listen to her read that all day long. It is brilliant with what the issue is, but somehow before that all gets enacted, we need a better way of dispatching on priority 1 and 2 calls. And no, I don't have, I wish I had the answer. I don't have it, but somehow it needs to be found, because I think the Auditor General's report is going to take a few years to get that moving. And so in the meantime, I'm sure in the last 11 months that I've been chasing this, somebody else has waited more than an hour and a half for a police officer. You can see from the paperwork I sent you that they were still dispatching on the call at 7 o'clock at night from a call at 3:40 in the afternoon. Like, how can you still be dispatching on the call? It just was a massive confusion for reasons I can't understand, and none of the people I spoke to really want to address the topic, because instead of saying, yes, this was a mess, and oh my God, we need to look at it, they're all just pointing fingers at other people. I don't have an answer for you, but somebody needs to find one, because I'm sure there's been other people since this incident who have waited for over an hour with the exact same kind of communications error.
Thank you, Ms. Atwell. Are there any members of the committee that wish to ask the speaker any questions?
No, but I don't. But Mr. Chair, we do have police services on the line. Maybe they want to comment on the auditor's recommendations. It did come to the Police Services Board, which we adopted. Anyone from Police Services want to make a comment?
So I'll just thank Ms. Atwell for joining us today, and we will now move into committee and questions of staff. And Councillor Nunziata, I guess your question is at staff.
Yes, if a representative from the Police Services could just comment on the Auditor General's report and on the recommendations. I know we adopted it at the Police Services Board. If you want to make a few comments.
Chair, it's James Corning. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
I can start, perhaps Staff Superintendent Johnson can supplement. We, as you can see by our written response to the Auditor General, we're in complete support of every one of the recommendations and we're committed to implementing them all. We've started to work with the city on a number of matters that are referred to in the audit reports, and that gives us a good base for attempting to satisfy the recommendations with respect to operations and our response to 911 calls. Don't know if there's much more I can say in respect of the overlap with the city. Rob, like supplement.
Thank you, James. So just to reiterate what was just mentioned, it's important to say, and I know we've got Denise Campbell on here. We have been working in partnership for over a year and a half with respect to the Toronto Community Crisis Support Service and the Gerstein pilot that has helped helped us to divert calls in the mental health arena to people that are better equipped to deal with these things. The issue still is, when folks call the police, we need to get consent to be able to divert that call. So, while the early results show that, there's a lot of work to be done. And as James had said, and the Auditor General had spelled out, we all need to work together to be able to move this forward. And the TPS is certainly ready and willing to do that.
Thank you. Any other further questions?
Yeah, so to the auditor, so you mentioned as part of your presentation where 911 calls get number of calls for noisy parties. I mean, seems, especially in the summer, we get that. So what I've been told, though, because I've had actually in the last couple of weeks from residents, that they've contacted 311 and 311 has referred them to 911 to call the police. And so there seems to be a disconnect there. And it's really important that we all work together because residents are confused. They're told by 311, no, it's not us, call 911. The police are saying, no, it's 311. So there's a lot of confusion out there. So what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, and Chair, we did see that within the work that we did and within our sample. And without trying to solve each and every one of these today, what I can say is that taking them away and identifying the protocols that need to happen, making sure that the right group is going to respond, and being open to, I would say, more alternative responses around that is going to be really important. So, this isn't a time to take what you've just said, Counselor, and open that up to find out why that's happening. But we saw that within our sample time and time again. So if it was at night, the police would probably have to go. If there's somebody's having a birthday party with alcohol, the police would probably have to go. And really, they don't necessarily need to go. So it's important for the partners to take it away from this table and work on that and come back with a protocol to make sure the right call gets to the right area and that there's no going around the merry-go-round with calls going from 311 to 911 back to 311. It's important to stop that.
Yeah, so just on that point, so with 311 and with MLS, that they don't have, if there's a noisy party late at night, they don't have staff to investigate these noisy parties at night. So you have to make arrangements for them to be there. So they're not there. They don't work at night. So you have to make those arrangements. So we would have to work with MLS to coordinate that. Because it's very difficult, because when you call MLS, this is, well, we don't work at night. So we have to make arrangements for them to come in a specific location. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done there. As far as communication, so what would you recommend as far as the communication for residents on when to call 911? Like, what sort of would you recommend?
I just want to just to answer your first piece, Counselor, around noisy parties. What we have seen, and actually MLS has piloted alternative dispute resolution, because what we saw were some calls where somebody said it's the fifth time this month or that we've heard this noise, and they actually use mediation to resolve some of these, and that pilot was successful. So I think that there is, let's just say, to your point, it's time to take it away. Let's look at alternative responses. And 20% of the time that the police drive out to that noisy party, it's gone by the time they get there. So it's wasted resources and impacting their overall response time. Time to take that away, and let's look at opportunities. To the education, your second part of your question, you know, there was an education program that was done in 2012. There's some work done in 2017, and if there were reductions, and so it's important to refresh those to be clear when to dial. I think in Calgary, 211 is a community distress line, which means you need help with somebody who might be homeless or somebody who may need some mental health support. 311 is for all of your community services like garbage collection and noise, and 911 is for an emergency, medical emergency, crime, those kinds of things. And so we put up a slide that had an example out of Maryland, very clear to dial one of those three numbers. So that is, so that there's an education plan, but really it's not for me to say that that's the right one. It's really for the city to take it away with TPS and identify what those numbers need to be. And maybe there's even a non-emergency number, and we identified that for police as a potential recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And I see, Carlton, you're on the line. So the comment I made about noisy parties, do you have any comments on that? I know you helped me out a week ago, but if you can just comment.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a comment. We do have staff that works evenings, and they work until 2 in the morning. And we recognize that 50% of our noise calls are on Friday and Saturday nights, and we have people until 2 in the morning. What we do not have is immediate responders. We cannot get a call at 11 and get someone there at 11:30 or at 1 o'clock. What we can do is, if we're having an issue at a location and it's every Saturday at 11 o'clock, we would be there the following Saturday, and we would be there to enforce the noise bylaw and as appropriate, and to work police again on the larger parties. Again, it's officer safety is a big concern for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Are there further questions from the committee? I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a couple. If I could ask the clerks to start my clock. Just further to the closing comment by Mr. Grant, you know, if a call comes in at 11:30, MLS can't be there within 15 minutes. Or sorry, if the call comes in 11 o'clock, MLS can't be there by 11:30. Does experience show that, you know, on a busy Friday night, that even the police could be there by 11:30?
Thank you. Actually, on a normal average night, it's 5 hours. So they're gone, they're running around. So there's a really knowing all of this, understanding what Mr. Grant has said around, you know, their availability, but even with that, and also looking for the repeat groups, you know, taking those groups and having a proactive mediation to solve it so that there's no more further repeat calls would be important. So support them on that for sure. And yeah, it takes either group, at least, you know, the police, it's about 5 hours.
My point exactly. So there's a gap. Would you say, Madam Auditor, that there's a gap between public's expectation and perception of services provided by the city as a large organization, which I would say the city or the police, and what people are looking for? And we need to sort that out. We need to figure out how we'll close the gap.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct. And I believe there are opportunities if we understand and share the problem and then identify ways to resolve it in a systemic way. I think there's opportunities here.
So, Madam Auditor, I'll ask you to answer this, but if the police wanted to chime in as well, because I know they're on the call, I think everybody in the room here would agree that when someone is in life peril, their safety is at risk, or maybe even there's, imminent danger to the security of property. People expect that you would call 911, you probably get a police response or immediate first responder, but where things get a little different is when you address the issue of keeping the peace. And some people may perceive that, that's the job of the police to go handle some noisy party or people lighting fireworks in the park. And we know that, the pressures of the city doesn't mean that they can respond that way, but do you have advice to council? And I guess you would give advice to the Toronto Police Services Board because it's separate about how these two organizations split that. We figure out where a police officer responds to deal with the notion of keeping peace and where, the city could respond to help keep the peace in the city.
Thank you. I would, Chair, I would say that there are times when you need an immediate response because maybe something might escalate, for example. But having the information and coordinating the information across the city provides the opportunity to leverage groups that are doing some amazing work. The neighborhood group and St. Stephen's House, as a group that they're using pilots. I know that the city, Carlton Grant's group has done some pilots around neighborhood, some disputes between neighbors. That is exploring those opportunities more and really figuring out, where that could go to almost off-ramp these calls in the future would be great. So maybe you might get a call one night, but you're not going to be called the other 5 nights. And so, because the issue will be resolved between the neighbors, so it wouldn't escalate, for example. I know that there's just a lot of opportunity to at least try those items and or have a police call, because when you look at it, if police are going to a level 4, priority 4, to a birthday party where there's maybe some alcohol and getting a little bit loud, or other noise complaints, or maybe some neighbors having a dispute, if they keep going back and back, they cannot get to the calls that the deputant has just spoken about. On an average night, it's 50 minutes. There was an inquiry that happened where police responded to a priority 2, and it was an ambulance call, and it was, at that time, it was 35 minutes or 38 minutes before the police arrived and the ambulance worked with, to service the patient. We're at 50 minutes for those priority 2s. When I evaluate the calls, what I think about is there another opportunity, because that time can go to a different caller that may have a more urgent need.
Can I get one more in there? I did notice in the report that there is a genuine approach to public service and customer service by first responders. And am I correct in understanding what the report tells us is that people are so driven to help others that if they arrive and they find out, okay, everyone here is safe, this party's okay, or this dispute between 2 people is okay, there's a human response that says, can I stay a little bit longer and help them out and try to resolve? And what I just wanted you to do, Madam Auditor General, if you think it's appropriate, is that confirm that people are still trying to do the right thing here. And there is importance to look at the system and so on, but we are driven as a customer service and customer-oriented organization, and perhaps that is part of the difficulty that we face.
You're right on, Chair. Police are going because they are called as a last resort in people's minds. And they go because, the question is, who's going to help? They're being called into the 911. And if you can find each one of these calls, not only stay a bit longer, but it's called clearance time. You have to write a report. You have to take down the names. You have to interview everybody. So it takes well over an hour once you arrive there. So it's eating up time, and that's time taken away from another call. I have to say, I know there's been some, I would say, misunderstanding, and I would say that's breeded some mistrust. If people would just work from the perspective that the heart is where they're trying to respond to be helpful, not always working out that way, we understand that, but that's where they're coming from, then you can move forward as a city to off-ramp those calls and find an alternative solution. You're sharing the problem, and then you're having a solution. So I can say that they're going because they're called. In many cases, there's opportunities for the city to step in with alternatives, and they need to work together to make sure that's done safely, methodically, and that no harm comes to people in that process.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. I didn't have any more questions. I'll do one last check with the committee. Councillor Fillion.
Yes, thank you for a very thorough report, and really, the answers to my questions are mostly addressed in detail in the report, but a question for both the Auditor General and Chief Raymer, just if someone, I think your average person would say, this is something that, there's general agreement needs to be done. Why is it taking this long for us to get there? How much longer will it take? And how can we speed that up?
Is that for me?
I'll start with you, Madam Auditor General, and then give the Chief a chance to respond as well.
The reason I believe that it's been slow until this point is understanding why this is happening and looking at the information. We independently reviewed the calls. We had to listen to every single call in order to get some data. Their information systems are lacking. I think there's a misunderstanding of why they're going, and once they understand that there is other alternatives for some of these low priority calls for sure, or calls that have more appropriate alternative responses, I can say right from the police union to Chief Raymer, the TPS has assured and put in writing that they are on board. So I believe this is a new understanding, and you need a roadmap to get there, and I believe you're going to see the joint progress to the shared outcomes.
So just on the sort of the second and third part of that, how much longer would you reasonably expect it will take to get us there? And is there, anything council can do to speed that up other than, going through what's recommended?
Yeah, I would say in the short term, to keep going and expanding those community pilots. What Denise Andrea Campbell has shown in her work, some of the work that Carlton Grant has done in relation to alternative disputes, keep that growing. You can do that right now. And besides that, and in parallel, work with TPS to develop the strategic plan. So I feel that it's going to be a longer term, not only to develop it, but to also evaluate it. And I would say in 5 years, you're going to have a difference. But there is much that can be evaluated probably every half year to see how things are rolling and if it's still on track. And I will leave that to the groups that are going to commit to this as they move forward.
Chief, did you wish to add to that?
Sorry, it's James Cornish here. I'm the strategic advisor and general counsel to the chief, but he's in full. So I'll try to answer the question on his behalf, but again, maybe Staff Superintendent Johnson could supplement. I'm a long-term prosecutor, and I saw the social safety net being dismantled over decades. What we're dealing with here is symptom of that. What we saw in the report from the Auditor General is that we are really we're not just the last option for help, sometimes, often we're the only option. As we build other score response, such as Ms. Campbell's project that we are supporting, we'll be able to get out of some of this business and look after the priority 1, 2, and 3 calls. But that's not, didn't get into this little span of weeks. We're not going to get out of it span of weeks either. Rob, you have
Just a couple of things to add, and
Yes.
they're probably self-evident, but it's a capacity issue. The calls for service, have increased, population in the city's increased, and our workforce has decreased. Now, it's not always obviously about hiring more people, but that's part of the issue as well. And certainly having other people, other agencies and entities to be able to assist us with that is important as well. The problem is, and Deputy Mayor, you raised it around, keeping the peace. There's also the other aspect of safety. And these concepts sometimes are a little bit ambiguous or subjective, depending on who you talk to. And when we get the call, there's always a potential of a what if happens, right? So the police are called, there's nobody else to go, so we have to go. Once you go, it's not just showing up and saying, not for us, see you later, call somebody else. The officers have to be engaged, take reports. There's a whole bunch of things that they have to do that do eat up their time. And as a result, they're not available for other calls for service. So, there's a whole bunch of things that we need to do. And I'm encouraged by the work from the Auditor General and her team that are going to help us, sort of find some solutions that will take some time. But, like I said earlier, we're on board to make sure that we do our part to make this happen.
Thank you for the very frank answers, especially on the social safety net. One last question, Mr. Chair. Is there, I would love to be able to put out in my e-newsletter just a succinct summary of, when you call 911, when you call your, your local division, when you call somebody else. Does such a thing exist that that could be easily put out to people just to reduce the number of calls going to the wrong places?
Hi, Councillor Filion. It's Beth Waldman calling from Strategic Public and Employee Communications. We worked over the last couple of years with Toronto Police. We have a campaign that exists called Make the Right Call, and there are postcards and all sorts of things that we can share with you that can certainly tide you over while we relaunch that campaign in line with some of the suggestions of the Auditor General.
Great, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll just add the comment, Ms. Baldwin, if you have a chance, if you can circulate some of that material to members of council. We've got limited opportunity right now to communicate, but I think that's a value, is getting those messages out as quickly and as frequently as possible. So if there's stuff already available, I do suggest, if at all possible, circulate to members. With that, I think that's all the questions. I will turn to members wishing to speak on this item. Councillor Nunziata.
I'll just speak. Yes, and if we can get that information sent to the Councillor's office, that would be good. So I do support the recommendations in 5 and 6. And I know the chair, you would be making a few motions from the mayor's letter that we have, which I support as well. So when the Auditor General came to the Toronto Police Services Board, and with her report, it was carried unanimously, and as well as the Police Association as well was there to speak in support of it as well. There are issues, and we realize there's issues, and, I do agree, the population in Toronto has increased drastically. And so there are more calls going into 911. And as the auditor mentioned, when we had the hydro, when we had an outage with the hydro, people were calling 911. They didn't know who to call, right? And I think that they call 911 because they believe that they'll get a faster response. and they feel safer if they call 911 parties and that, which I've had quite a few in my ward. And Carlton, I don't know if you're still there, but I want to thank you. I did speak to you about that noisy party in my ward, and we were able to resolve it. So thank you, Carlton, for that. But we need to, there needs to be a partnership, and where there is an issue where it's an ongoing issue every weekend that somebody's having noisy parties and hundreds of people and there's music going on and on and on. I think it's important that the police and MLS, they work together in partnership and they go to these establishments and they work with the community on that. And that could be done. And I realize that we don't have MLS staff that's out there every weekend because there are so many parties going on throughout the city. But it's really important, and I agree with your recommendations, that we have to get all the agencies on side. And, we need to have a communication plan in place, and it's really important. I do know that when the report came to the police services, we did adopt it, and the chief was very, very supportive of your report. And we did move a number of recommendations that's also in the report as well. But what I must say about the Toronto Police as well is that what we're doing now is with the neighborhood officers as well, where there's an issue in the community, if we contact the neighborhood officers, they try to do mediation with the residents. And it doesn't have to be a call at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and they try to resolve these issues as well. So we are doing a lot more at the police services as well, working with the neighborhood officers on trying to resolve some of these issues that are happening weekly, and we've been very successful at that as well. So I just want to say to the Auditor General that thank you very much for your report. I know this is your last meeting. We are going to miss you, and especially I'm speaking on behalf of the committee, but the reports that you have brought forward over the years, which we've always adopted unanimously, and there's been millions of dollars in savings as well with various departments on your reports, and thank you very much for that. And I will be supporting the motions and the recommendations we have before us.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Any other members wishing to speak? Okay, I'll go ahead. Madam Clerk, if I could ask that you present the motions. It's just my colleagues, by paraphrasing them. There's actually 4, but they're very similar, and that's because there's 2 reports before us. So motion number 1 in both reports asks the Deputy City Manager, Community and Social Services to play both a leading and coordinating role for all of the city divisions that would be involved in implementing the Auditor General's recommendations as they pertain to the city, because that's important to note. There's a whole bunch of recommendations in the sub-reports to TPSB, but there's certain ones that go to the city. And then the second motion on both of them asks for a follow-up report with urgency. So when we come back, when council comes back after the election period, in about 6 months' time, we can see what the progress is. With the only variation in report number 6, I'm suggesting that we ask for recommendation number 3 to be reported on an expedited basis, and that has to do with the accompaniment of Toronto Police Services with paramedics, and there's some specific recommendations in the report. So generally, I hope you'll support those. So just generally comments on this. I want to start by saying thank you to a few people for making this happen. And the first is the Toronto Police Services Board, and I know, Madam Speaker, you're on that, but the wisdom and the acceptance to suggest that Madam Auditor General spend time there and allow that to happen, because it takes resources in order to allow Madam Auditor General to do her work. And also, of course, the Toronto Police Services who cooperated with Madam Auditor General to go through all of this. And, what do you know? We have some learnings here that are really important to people. Of course, Ms. Anderson and Madam Auditor General, for your work on the report. Now, why is this important? Because if you haven't done it yourself, like, you must know somebody that's called 911. I haven't called it very many times in my life, but I can think of a couple of times, and even frankly more recently, that I've had to call that because something really bad was in progress happening or was potentially about to happen. And I'm really pleased because I didn't have all of the same issues that come up in the report, but I've certainly heard from others that have that concern. And so this is one of those audits that touches everybody in the city at the most human level. Like, what do we rely on? And we learned this. We were reminded of it last week when there was a major network outage. And some people couldn't even call 911. And you kind of feel like you may as well be like way up camping in the far north and on your own because you couldn't summon help. You'd have to run to the fire station and knock on the door and say there's a fire, right? That's how much we rely in an urban center on something as clear and something that we forget about in our day-to-day lives as a 911 service. So in terms of public confidence in our government and in our system, this is job number one. And I am excited about the things that Madam Auditor General found. Some of them are really technical. We don't have time to go through it all in the committee today, but it's definitely in the report. But it's about taking seconds off that call and getting those dispatches to happen efficiently. Like, shocking, you read in there in the pie chart, you find out the majority of the calls that go into the 911 center don't even belong there. So it's no wonder that there's peak times and people are waiting to just get the beginning of their call addressed. Never mind to triage it and then send it out to dispatch and actually get a first responder on site. Time is spent at the front end. So anything we can do to help improve that. I mean, if you looked at the pie chart, pocket dials and requests for information and non-911 calls were more than 50%. And that's giving people the benefit of the doubt that even the non-emergency police matters were less than the majority. And then I think it was about a quarter or a third of the chart were ones that were priority 1, 2, and 3 response, where somebody's life is in danger or you need that immediate response. So anything we can do to improve that, I think ultimately gives people better customer service at the end of the day. So that's exciting, as is the potential for transformation. And back to my motions, we're going to ask one of the DCMs to look at this to find out how we can better work with the Toronto Police Services Board and the Toronto Police Service to make it happen. But it's about highest and best use of people's times. Police, fire, and paramedics are trained professionals. They are first responders. And you have to wonder, if they're going out and they're dealing with something, can their time be better used dealing with those priority calls? And can we as a city find ways to divert some of their time for those calls to other types of service? And that doesn't mean that, suddenly we're just going to stop taking noise calls to 911 and then send it all over to MLS. I mean, there's going to be instances when the police have to go, and people need to be confident in that. But as Mr. Grant said, there's examples where there's just a recurring noise issue every Friday night at a particular location. And the question is it wise to dial 911 and then have the police dispatch to respond to that issue when there could be a better way to solve the root cause of the issue? So I think these are all really important and valuable components of this report. I think it ultimately leads to better customer service at the end of the day and people's higher degree of confidence in government. And, as we heard from one of the speakers today, she had expressed concern and worry about the availability of emergency services and people to respond. So all of this brings things in the right direction, and it also does one of the fundamental things that we do at the Audit Committee is also pay attention to the allocation of resources and making sure that we're using those resources as efficiently as possible. And then finally, as I always like to point out, these audit reports, they aren't the solution, although Madam Auditor General, you did give us a roadmap that helps, but they are the catalyst for change. And I think it's a lot of work that will happen following this audit that leads to that change, but the journey needs to begin somewhere. So with that, I will thank everybody involved, and I hope you'll support my amending motions and, of course, the report in general. Thank you. So on the amendments, Madam Clerk, I guess. So the amendments to number 5, there are 2 amendments. I paraphrased them. I don't know if they're up on the screen, but all those in favor on the amendments, any opposed, and that is carried. And then on AU, thank you, Madam Clerk. Item as amended, AU 13.5, all those in favor, any opposed, and that is carried. And on the amendments to AU 13.6, all those in favor, any opposed, and that is carried. And then on the item as amended, AU 13.6, all those in favor, any opposed, and that item is carried. Thank you. Okay, just back to the order paper here. We have AU 13.8. That's been held by Councillor Fillion. Councillor, do you suspect that we need to go into camera on that? And if so, I propose to reorder it.
I'm not sure that we do, but I haven't heard back from legal, so if you could make it the last
hold it.
item, that gives them a bit more time to respond.
Thank you. And if it's the will of the committee, we will reorder that item to the last. And so we will go to AU 13.9. I'll ask my colleagues if anyone has questions of staff on the item. Seeing none. Would anyone like to speak on the item? I did. I had some amendments. No? Okay. So, sorry, I should read the title. The AU 13.9, which is the status update on the IT disaster recovery plan. So no questions and no speakers. I will speak briefly. Madam Clerk, if you could display, and I know they were circulated, I had 2 amendments. And that really is just a report back request. Most notably, colleagues, I'll point out, the first one is a report back on a citywide risk governance model. But you'll see that I've included both, well, all 3, the Chief Technology Officer, the Chief Information Security Officer, and the Director of the Office of Emergency Management, and sorry, a 4th, the Director of Internal Audit, to come back to the Audit Committee with more work on risk governance model. And secondly, a report back as well on the Information Technology Disaster Recovery Plan and the recovery plans within the city divisions, agencies, and corporations. So that's really just a follow-on of status, as we're doing in many of the other large work programs, and their report back to the committee. So I hope you support those. I think that it's important to follow up on these matters. So on those amendments, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. On the item AU 13.9 as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Okay, AU 13.11, which is the Welch LLP report on Arena Board financial controls and governance. I'm just going to confer with the clerk. All right, so we have just the item before us. I'll check to see if there are questions from committee members of staff. Seeing none, any members of the committee wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will speak briefly, but I have 2 motions that again were pre-circulated, and I'll just talk through them. So the first item is an amendment of staff recommendation number 2 to add the words "and any other common findings or opportunities which may be of benefit to the boards of community centers which report through the audit committee." And the second motion, which is a standalone, is that the audit committee requests the city manager to review the status of missing audits and recommendations not yet implemented contained in management letters for boards of arenas and community centers, and report to the audit committee in the second quarter of 2023 with recommendations on how to address any outstanding issues of concern. So I'll offer my colleagues the following comments. Members, you will be familiar and will notice that we do spend a lot of time bringing a number of audits from smaller entities that make up the city. And we've got several arena boards and we've got several community center boards. And the resources that they have are not exactly the same as the Toronto Public Service. So they have to think about and work through audits and control processes in a little different way than we do at the city. And from time to time, we notice that an audit isn't here on time, or gets held up. And we know that management letters come through, and sometimes there are small issues in the management letters that need to be followed up upon as our job as overseers and governance in this committee. And there just needs to be a process to keep track of all that. So Welch LLP has offered some suggestions in a sub-report. It's not a staff report, but it's suggestions from the external auditor on how to improve the process and maybe find ways to help the smaller entities. So the city manager has let us know that they're going to come back and report on some recommendations, and the motions that I have are some enhancements to that reporting. I think this is an important matter from a governance perspective, but it is, from a scalar sense, proportionately different than many of the other things that we see before the Audit Committee. But nonetheless, it's important to be diligent on these and also support our agencies and boards. So with that, I hope you will support the amendments. On those amendments to AU 13.11, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. On item AU 13.11, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Second to last, we have AU 13.13, which is the Auditor General's 2022 Work Plan Update and Request for Administrative Amendment to City Reserve Fund Accounts. Are there any members of the committee with questions on this item? Seeing none, any members wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, I do have a motion. This motion was developed in consultation with the CFO. And the motion is that when this item arrives to City Council, that City Council forward the report from the Auditor General to the Budget Committee for consideration through the 2023 budget process. And I will admit that that is a little different than what the Auditor General has laid before us. But this recommendation I'm bringing forward to the committee has been done in consultation with folks involved in the financial and budgeting process. And I believe that there's a utility in it. And it is important that the committee will note that this will not make things easier for the Auditor General with respect to the finances, and that the auditor has informed me that it can place some risk on audits that are ongoing. But committee and council will need to balance those against the requirements of our financial process. So I hope you will support that amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? And that is carried. All those in favor of the item as amended? Any opposed? And that is carried. Okay, one final item, and we'll go back to the top of the list. And that is AU 13.8. I'm just going to confer with the clerk. Thank you, members of the committee. I just conferred with the clerk on some process, and I suspect Councillor Fillion or myself can move this item without recommendations, which will avoid going into camera today. And so I will pause there. We do not. It will depend on the nature, but I guess at council, an item could be moved on confidential documentation, which would not necessitate going into camera, but either is possible. I think the most efficient course, just based on who's available and what's available to the committee, is to send it without recs and deal with it that way. So I'm going to pause and just check with the committee if there's any questions. I will check with the committee that if anyone wishes to speak. Councillor Fillion.
Just very briefly, you know, I think this is obviously a serious matter, and that you know, serious action needs to be taken on, and perhaps we can sort out exactly what that might be between now and council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Fillion. Did you want to move it without recs, or would you like me to do? Okay.
I'll do that.
I'll take Councillor Fillion's advice. So just to confirm, Councillor Fillion, question of the mover, it is possible that this could be dealt with without going into camera at council, just depending on how this unfolds. Yep. Okay. Okay, so the amendment is on the screen, that it be amended that the item be forwarded to council without recommendations from Councillor Fillion. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Madam Clerk, there seems to be something wrong with my screen. There's nothing left on it. That is the final item of the committee meeting. So I thought, being the last audit meeting, especially that, Madam Auditor General, your term is coming towards an end. I wondered if some members of the committee wanted to say a couple of words. And I guess we can leave the meeting running if anyone wanted to say things in public, and then we can terminate the meeting if anyone wanted to say something in private to Madam Auditor General. But all right. Well, is there any other members of the committee wishing to say something? All right. Councillor Fillion, please go ahead, and I'll have something to say too.
Good, thank you. It's really hard to sum up Beverly in a few words. I'll start with an anecdote, which was actually the first thing I ever contacted her about. It was a land transaction which seemed very suspicious to me, and called her up. She answered her phone right away, was in my office in 15 minutes. Within 24 hours was investigating the situation, and within a relatively short time after that, the transaction had been canceled, you know, which is really like remarkable all around. Like each one of those steps was kind of remarkably efficient. And it's, you know, it's really been a privilege to work with Beverly, and you know, her integrity, her determination, and her real, you know, zeal to get to the bottom of things has just been, you know, exemplary. And you know, you'll be greatly missed, Beverly.
I appreciate the words. Thank you so much, Councillor. It was a pleasure working with you.
Thanks, Councillor Fillion. So I'm feeling a little grumpy because I really enjoy the work on the committee, and I really owe a tribute to Beverly Romeo Beeler, Madam Auditor General. You know, I started scribbling down a list of all of the really interesting things we've talked about over the last couple of years. So, like, if you think this committee is about calculators and things like that, like, it's completely wrong. Like, just a sampling. Physical security, asset management, fuel cards, parts and maintenance of buses, risk management framework, long-term disability, real estate, water billing accounts. I learned all about paving and asphalt. I mean, who could forget that? Cell phone plans, extended health benefits, unusual drug claims, something called ED drugs. I had to look up what those were. So, I mean, the substance is all over the place. Toronto building permits, MLS business licensing, all right, holistic health centers. I mean, the breadth of things. Nightclubs, there's a good one. Nightclubs, we talked about that. IT infrastructure, provincial offense fines and tickets, always popular with everybody. Childcare, TCHC, rental agreements, fleet repairs, tree maintenance. I mean, how many times have we had a report on tree maintenance? Pay and benefits, cybersecurity, and those reports continue, and they continue now spilled over into the General Government and Licensing Committee. Housing waiting lists and RGI. TTC Presto cards. Got one in my wallet, as that affects everybody in the city. Something about a medical spa. We heard about that. Winter maintenance, who could forget that? That was a council discussion. Affordable home ownership, rental replacements, fire and life safety systems. You learned everything you wanted to know about how fire and life safety systems and how the inspections go. Of course, shelters. Talked a lot about shelters. 911 and policing. I mean, those are just the ones that I scribbled down that I could remember quickly. But what a journey we've been on. And so, you know, a couple of things that I learned in my time on this committee that I think are reflective of the leadership of the Auditor General's office is that, I mentioned it again today, you know, these audits are important because they talk about the use of resources and the integrity of the system, but they speak really to people's confidence in the system, right? People know that they can submit a request to the fraud or a complaint to the fraud and waste hotline, and that oftentimes when you can tie the strings together, it leads into a report, and then it leads to a massive piece of change. But, you know, mixed into this list, and, you know, some of them are technical, but some of them really speak to the day-to-day life of people in the city and really speak to people who are sometimes on the margins, human beings. We call them citizens or customers. But, you know, I actually really, one stands out to me is just the shelter plan. We talked about at the last meeting, which was transformational. You know, it sets up things to wrap around case management about people and try to get the most successful outcome possible. So it's no longer about, you know, can we just get some sort of a roof or a structure over someone and maybe give them a hot meal. It's now more about, can we bring someone through a journey to get to where they want to go? And maybe that's being housed. Childcare. Can we get the best services? And, you know, we see a lot of that in the news. Cybersecurity and 911, like, are the phones going to work? And I also think about the impact of the work of Madam Auditor General. You know, we talk about it in here. Sometimes it makes the media, especially if it's interesting. Sometimes it makes international media. But I'll tell you, I was chatting with some electricians one time, you know, and knowing them, they certainly don't read the audit agendas. Why would they? And they might notice things in the newspapers and on the reports and on the television channels. But they told me, boy, you know, we do fire inspection work and fire installations, and we heard you dealt with this at the city, and, like, things are different out there. And that was like the moment that suddenly everything changed, that, oh my gosh, like the work inside here and the leadership by you, Madam Auditor General, has an impact on the world outside of the city. And I'm not trying to brag or do anything like that about our committee, but but we should brag about you. And we should recognize that, you've done things here that truly improve people's lives. And maybe the only other thing I would say that speaks a testament about your character and about your tenacity and your resilience is, there's different ways that audits start, right? There's the risk management process. I know we've talked about that. You go through and you identify risks in the city and you create a plan. And you get complaints from fraud and waste. And then, you might get a complaint from a member of city council or referral from council. And then there's those ones that are just organic, that you just come up from a creative perspective, from being inquisitive, from saying that doesn't seem right. Those numbers, they don't line up, so what does that mean? And then you keep pulling on the thread and you pull and you pull and you pull and you pull, and suddenly the sweater comes undone and then you got an audit report. And I think we owe you a great gratitude for your service and for your passion, and it shows. It shows when you say that this is a hairball, right? Everybody remembers that. But it shows passion and dedication to the city. So I just really want to say, on behalf of the committee, thank you for all that you've done for us as a city, because I'm a citizen too. And I've really enjoyed my time personally working here and working with you. And, you are truly unique and special. And wherever you go next in your journey, they are lucky to have you helping out, because it's just so much more than these papers and these reports. It's about changing the world around us and changing it for the better. So thank you. And we'll give a quick round of applause.
Thank you, Chair, for the look at this. So kind.
Beverly, who's your favorite counselor?
Oh. Very kind. Thank you so much. Well, let me get to that in a moment. I wish to thank actually all of City Council, because you have been engaged and supportive, and you have embraced the framework for accountability officers, and I'd like to thank them at the same time. I'd like to thank the public service. In particular, I'd like to thank Chris and Peter Wallace before Chris. We take a risk-based approach. We look for opportunities to help with a roadmap, but every day they're doing amazing service. They're doing amazing service through the pandemic, despite the pandemic, and they go in every day. And if we can help with a roadmap here and there, we've done our job. So thank you to the public service and for being amazing to work with. Thank you to this audit committee. I start with Chin Lee, who welcomed me aboard and really helped to show me the ropes, onto the chair of this committee, Mr. Stephen Holliday, and Deputy Mayor Stephen Holliday, and to the vice chair, and to Councillor Filion and Councillor Nunziata, and also Councillor Ford, and also Councillor Matlow. And then finally, to my staff, you really make a difference. My job is to have a vision and to lead, and then to get it out of the way and support you in your work. And you have truly, truly made a difference. I don't want to look to my Deputy Auditor General, Ina Chan, who has been in the trenches since day one, and to my Assistant Auditor General, Tara Anderson, and to my entire team. And you've been completely amazing. This has been a journey. It's been like any journey you go on, you plan it, you have a lot of fun, and you remember those times when it got really tough, and that's really what brought you together. But to everybody, to City Council, to the public service, to the Audit Committee, and to staff, thank you for allowing me to be a little part of this journey. Thank you very much.
So a quick final thank you from me to Vice Chair Filion and Councillors Nunziata and Councillor Matlow and all of the other councillors that were part of the committee. And of course, to Catherine and to Julie and all of the clerk staff that have made this happen. I often joke in this configuration I don't like, because in the previous, and Rosemary started it.
That's right.
She was able to reach over and kick me under the table and keep me on track as a chair. So I truly appreciate that. We can't do that. It's now a little virtual, but But I couldn't do it without the support of everybody here, and for that, I am truly grateful. And again, Vice Chair Fillion, Vice Chair Fillion is not just the vice chair that keeps copied on the stuff in case I have to get up and go, but also your counsel on so many of these items. I know our politics can be a little different at times at City Council, but most definitely I enjoy working with you on this committee, and I think we share very passionate common goals, so couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much, everyone. And with Vice Chair Fillion, go ahead, because I was just going to drop the gavel.
Very much mutual admiration society today, but you know, I just want to say you've just been a fantastic chair, like just, and really appreciate the extent to which you've involved me as vice chair, and really have felt I've had the opportunity to work alongside you, and with Beverly, it just, you know, couldn't be better, couldn't have been better. So really appreciate that. Thank you. Wonderful leadership.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And with that, the 13th meeting of the Audit Committee is adjourned.